The National Desk, America's News Now.
The big three auto companies fighting back with new threats of plant closures. The latest on day 5 of strikes and what happens by the end of the week if no deal is reached. Then congressional bickering over a funding bill now heating up within the same party. Just ahead, a closer look at the biting critiques.
If moderate Republicans sign a discharge petition with Democrats, they are signing their own political death warrant and they are handing it to their executioner.
And Mel Tucker fires back at Michigan State, why he says other motives are at play with his impending firing. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. Right now, auto manufacturers have begun making their own threats against the striking United Auto Workers as negotiations remain stalled. General Motors has warned that 2,000 workers could be out of work at its Fairfax assembly plant in Kansas this week, all because of a shortage of materials supplied by workers on strike at the Wentzville plant in Missouri. Stellantis could also be downsizing, as they told the UAW in their last counteroffer they could close up to 18 plants across the country as they repurpose these facilities to Amazon-like distribution hubs. Many of the plants targeted have already been idle. There were no talks today, but discussions are set with GM and Ford for tomorrow and Stellantis on Thursday. Union President Shawn Fain said that if there is no progress in labor negotiations, the next round of strikes will start at noon on Friday. Roughly 13,000 workers at 3 auto plants have been picketing since last Friday. Meanwhile, the union Unifor that represents Canadian auto workers extended their strike deadline with Ford for an additional 24 hours. Ford had given a counteroffer last night, but it was rejected. Ford now has until 11:59 tonight to reach a deal before a possible strike tomorrow. Unifor has extended their deadlines with GM and Stellantis as they target Ford for the work stoppage. And it comes as we learn former President Donald Trump plans to meet with auto workers on strike in Michigan next week. And he isn't the only candidate looking to appeal to workers and their grievances. National correspondent Atra Al-Nashar has more.
No deals, no wheels. A standoff between striking auto workers and the big 3 auto manufacturers, creating a potential opening for Republican presidential candidates hoping to win those workers over.
It'd be nice to get wages up to where we can go with cost of living around the area.
Pay, benefits, and job security are at the center of workers' list of demands from the companies. GOP candidates insist President Biden is the cause of their grievances.
Bidenomics and their green energy electric vehicle agenda is good for Beijing and bad for Detroit.
Frontrunner former President Trump will skip the second GOP debate next week to meet with striking workers, first reported by the New York Times. Trump likely to double down on his claim President Biden's push for electric vehicles will put them out of work.
The auto workers will not have any jobs, Kristen, because all of these cars are going to be made in China.
The Biden administration's goal is for EVs to make up 2/3 of new cars in the U.S. by 2032 and has loaned American automakers billions of dollars to bolster domestic supply chains. American University's Dr. David Jacobs says while EVs are not dividing labor and management, Trump may be appealing to workers who feel left behind.
All he wants to do is move some sliver of the electorate in Michigan, because that would be sufficient, perhaps, to win him the state.
President Biden, who calls himself the most pro-union president, sent 2 members of his administration to Detroit to aid the talks and has called for record contracts for workers. But some in his party worry blue-collar support is wavering.
It would be very, very foolish for the Biden administration to consider that workers' votes are already his.
As for an endorsement from UAW, President Shawn Fain is holding back on saying whether they'll back Biden again like they did in 2020, but tells his members that another Trump presidency would be a quote-unquote disaster. In Washington, I'm Atra Al-Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Atra, thank you. We turn now to the call to address climate change. President Biden calling for renewed urgency at the UN General Assembly this morning.
Record-breaking heat waves in the United States and China. Wildfires ravaging North America and Southern Europe. Together, these snapshots tell an urgent story of what awaits us if we fail to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and begin to climate-proof the world.
Another topic in the speech was Ukraine. Biden made an appeal to stand with the country against Russian aggression. He also touched on competition with China and stressed the importance of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Cheers heard from family members are looking at the moment Americans freed from Iran landed on U.S. soil. The 5, all of whom were wrongfully detained, released as part of a wider deal between the U.S. and Iran that included the U.S. unfreezing $6 billion in Iranian funds that had previously been sanctioned. The first Joe Biden impeachment hearing has been set for next Thursday. That's September 28th. The House Oversight Committee said that the hearing is going to focus on constitutional and legal questions surrounding the president's involvement in corruption and abuse of public office. A spokesperson for the committee said they intend to subpoena Hunter Biden and President Biden's brother James as early as this week. But first, the House Judiciary Committee will interrogate Attorney General Merrick Garland at a hearing taking place tomorrow morning. The GOP majority claims the Attorney General has weaponized the Department of Justice and will likely ask questions about how the department has handled investigations of Donald Trump versus how they handled Hunter Biden. Democrats say they will push back on the representations made by Republicans. Embattled MSU football coach Mel Tucker, he has responded today to the university's decision to fire him, saying, quote, "I'm disappointed but not surprised." The response comes in the wake of allegations of misconduct between Tucker and activist and rape survivor Brenda Tracy. Tucker hit back at MSU, saying the relationship with Tracy was consensual and suggested that, quote, other motives are at play as to why he was actually let go. The rail company involved in February's East Palestine, Ohio train derailment says it plans to compensate locals. Norfolk Southern says it will pay homeowners the difference between the appraised market value of their home and sale price if they did lose value. But people who accept the offer, they won't be able to make property damage claims as part of a lawsuit against the railroad company. The plan remains tentative. And tonight, along the southern border, border agents are once again overwhelmed and understaffed. On Sunday alone, more than 7,000 migrants apprehended, with more expected. Our Christine Frizzell brings us the latest.
It's an alarming reminder of how interconnected the world can be. This recent video shows thousands of migrants crossing the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama, headed toward the United States.
They are now jumping on the trains.
Those large numbers hampering the ability of Border Patrol agents to do their job, according to some former border officials.
We're not doing those interviews at the southwest border. The cartel's picking and choosing who enters our country right now instead of us, and that is a significant threat to this country.
He and others disputing claims by the Biden administration that those who have been released into the United States were properly vetted.
Think about it. If you're an illegal alien, for example, from Venezuela, Cuba, Russia, do you really think we're getting the full story and the criminal background from those countries before we're releasing them? Of course not. It's not happening.
The latest numbers from Customs and Border Protection show between 2017 and 2020, 14 individuals on the terror watch list were apprehended. Between 2021 and today, that number has jumped to 263. Raising fears about the migrants who were not apprehended. But cities like New York remain overwhelmed. And the New York Times just published its latest account, The Kids on the Night Shift, detailing the, quote, open secret of child labor in the United States. 14 and 15-year-old migrants working in dangerous factories around the country to pay off their debts and send money home.
And this increase in the number of migrants may be a sign that some of these more restrictive policies put into place a few months ago by the Biden administration, which initially slowed the numbers, may now be having less of an impact. Amira?
Christine, the system is clearly over inundated here. Is there anything the U.S. can do right now to try and stop these large groups from coming?
So a couple things. First of all, Congress could perhaps come up with comprehensive immigration reform, but that doesn't seem to be high on their priority list. The Biden administration actually did enter into an agreement with Panama and Colombia back in April to work together to try to stop these smuggling rings from putting these migrants through this Darien Gap. But Panamanian officials recently said that Colombia is not living up to its end of the bargain. By the way, the United Nations estimates that if these numbers continue by the end of this year, 400,000 migrants will have passed through the Darien Gap.
Wow, a staggering number there. Christine Frizzell in D.C. for us. Thank you. And coming up, the prison that convicted murderer Danilo Cavalcante escaped from is boosting security. The upgrades they hope will prevent another multi-day manhunt. Then brand new numbers reveal whether the country is going in the right direction when it comes to heart disease and obesity. And what led up to a hotel takeover by a group of friends in Nashville, how hotel management is responding. We are back in 90 seconds. Fox Business and Univision will moderate the second Republican presidential primary debate a week from tomorrow. It'll be at 9 p.m. Eastern at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. The social media platform Rumble will stream it. Candidates must be polling at 3% in certain polls and have at least 50,000 unique donors. Former President Trump, he is skipping the event. Not a total surprise. He did that last time. Instead, he plans to meet with striking auto workers in Michigan and give a primetime speech. He says the decision is based on his wide lead against his rivals in the polls and the fact that he says everyone already knows him. House Republican leadership yanked a procedural vote from the voting schedule on a stopgap funding bill as Republicans continue to discuss a path forward. Now, a tentative deal to fund the government through October was struck over the weekend by GOP lawmakers, but at least 12 conservative hardliners have not given their support. The House majority can only afford to lose 4 party votes if no Democrats push a bill through. After a morning caucus meeting, some Republicans feel as though progress is being made, while others are tired of the grandstanding of the select few.
There are conversations ongoing, and I think what was very productive about the conference meeting we just have is there are already members huddled, negotiating, working out these details, and I know my colleagues here today are going to be continuing to lead that discussion.
If the clown show of colleagues that refuse to actually govern does not want to pass a CR, I will do everything we need to make sure that a CR passes. The bottom line here is this: we're not shutting the government down.
As the clock ticks down on a possible government shutdown next week, the national debt does continue to break records, now at a record $33 trillion. Scott Thuman explains why many say it has gotten out of control.
As the threat of a shutdown looms,
nobody wins in a government shutdown.
I mean, I'm really worried we can't get any budgets out.
The worries over government spending also reaching a fevered pitch.
On behalf of the American people, we know inflation is one of the top concerns. We have to rein in this reckless, out-of-control spending that we've seen under the Biden administration.
A recent Treasury Department report shows the U.S. borrowed $1.5 trillion in the first 11 months of fiscal year 2023, meaning the country is on track to borrow twice as much as last year, according to the nonprofit Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. In an interview for Full Measure, committee president Maya McGuinness warned America's spending habits are dangerously going in the wrong direction.
What may appear out of control is the national debt. How do we ever dig our way out of that?
There are times it makes sense. When we are in an emergency like COVID or a huge recession, we absolutely should borrow. There are times when it does not make sense, like the huge growth spurt we had before we went into COVID under President Trump, or the inflationary period we've been having since COVID under President Biden.
And it's not hard to predict future problems.
We have automatic growth in Social Security, Medicare, other healthcare programs, and now interest on the debt, which are leading to huge structural imbalances that are only going to grow going forward.
But there's concern neither Democrats nor Republicans are willing to make the changes needed to stop this fiscal slide.
If we don't get our act together, we will be a weaker country, and American families will pay a real price in terms of their economic security, their opportunities.
The clock now ticking loudly, September 30th, fast approaching. In Washington, Scott Thuman for the National Desk.
All right, Scott, thank you. The Federal Reserve started a two-day policy meeting today. They'll come out with an interest rate decision tomorrow afternoon. The Fed expected to keep interest rates steady where they are. And U.S. home building, meantime, is declining. New data showing construction fell more than 11% from July to August. At the same time, building permits increased about 7%, but they're still down almost 3% from where they were just a year ago. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich will remain in a Russian jail until at least November 13th. The journalist appeared in Moscow court today to appeal his arrest on espionage charges. Now, he was denied for a second time. Gershkovich was detained in March while on a reporting trip. He's accused of trying to obtain state secrets, but the U.S. says the charges are baseless. If convicted, he could face up to 2 decades in a Russian prison. And right now, you are looking at photos of the recently upgraded Chester County Prison in Pennsylvania, the facility that Danilo Cavalcante escaped from on August 31st. The convicted killer was on the run for 14 days. Prison officials now responding to criticism of the perceived lack of security, revealing some of their most recent enhancements. Mesh and razor wire added to what was considered an unsecure area. You may recall Cavalcante escaped by crab walking between 2 walls up to an open roof. The prison says it's now also incorporating use of drones and other technology to detect prisoner movements. Comedian and influencer Russell Brand can no longer make money from YouTube after sexual assault allegations from several women. The BBC has also removed some of Brand's content from its streaming collection. Brand has 6.6 million YouTube subscribers. He also has millions of followers on other platforms. He denies those allegations, and he says the relationships were consensual. The date is now set. The trial for the suit against Newsmax over alleged election lies has been scheduled for September of next year. Dominion Voting Systems filed a $1.6 billion defamation suit alleging the conservative network promoted false claims that the voting technology company rigged the election against then-President Donald Trump. Fox News was sued under the same claims and earlier this year agreed to pay Dominion a $787 million settlement, the largest defamation settlement seen in U.S. history. The bankrupt crypto exchange FTX is suing the parents of co-founder Sam Bankman-Fried. FTX leaders want to recover money they claim Joe Bankman and Barbara Fried fraudulently transferred and misappropriated. Lawyers for Bankman and Fried say the allegations are completely false. Meanwhile, Sam Bankman-Fried's trial is set to begin on October 3rd. Alarming numbers published by the American Heart Association today. The number of U.S. adults who died of heart disease with obesity as a contributing factor tripled by 2020 in comparison to 1999. Obesity affects about 115 million people, including roughly 42% of all adults in the United States, has also increased dramatically just over the last few years. The study also shows that there's a racial component to obesity risks. Heart disease and death as blacks or African Americans had a disproportionate mortality rate as compared to Native Americans and whites, who were roughly equal, or people of Asian descent who had a much lower, although still increasing mortality rate over the last 20 years. The new variant of COVID-19 is causing a few new symptoms that didn't come with some of the previous ones. Medical reporter Liz Bonus shares why they might be easy to miss.
Hey there, hello to you. BA.286, as it's known, is the new highly mutated COVID variant. It's been reported in at least 10 states, which means it's likely everywhere. And so are its symptoms, including a few you might not know about.
You can count on the usual viral symptoms with this newer variant, also known as Parola. It feels much like the symptoms of the flu.
My body was aching, I was sore, my throat was itchy, and I'm like, something's not right. I didn't feel like eating, and I just slept all day.
Patient info reports among the most common with this new Parola infection are a runny nose, aches and pains, fatigue, sneezing, a lot of coughing, and a sore throat. But a second report in the UK also shows 3 other not-so-common symptoms showing up, which include rashes, eye problems, and irritation, as well as diarrhea. While these may not make you sick enough to land you in the hospital, there is a risk with any of these. Dehydration and respiratory complications can lead to severe illness and even death.
At the peak of COVID, we were having 25,000 Americans a week die from COVID. We're still having 600 a week die from COVID, which is significant, but obviously a lot less than 25,000 a week.
That's one of the reasons infectious disease specialist Dr. Robert Frank of Ohio's Cincinnati Children's Hospital says as the new COVID fall vaccines roll out, especially those at high risk for these complications should consider getting the shots.
Now, just in case you're wondering, the states where it's been reported so far: Colorado, Maryland, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Texas, Virginia, and Washington. And with that kind of a spread, it's going to be very hard to avoid just about anywhere you go. I'm medical reporter Liz Bonus. Back to you.
Liz, thank you. Coming up, a hotel takeover by a group of friends in Nashville and how hotel management is responding. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter most to you. We are taking the pulse of America. In Alabama, new body cam footage from the Birmingham Police Department shows an incident where a high school band director was arrested after refusing to stop his band from performing when the game ended. Police said he was charged with disorderly conduct, harassment, and resisting arrest. The arresting officer claimed the director pushed him during the arrest, leading the officer to use a taser. Attorney and Alabama State Representative Jundalyn Givens said that she will represent the director due to his violation of civil rights. A group of friends documented their hotel takeover in a Nashville La Quinta, staffed by, well, no one. They went to check in, but no one was there to help, so they took it upon themselves to step in and take charge. They worked behind the desk, answered phone calls, and served breakfast to hotel guests. But before they jumped into action, they asked a police officer who was there if they could try to check themselves in. And he said, do what you have to do. A hotel employee later explained that an employee left their shift early without telling management. Hotel management said they were working to address concerns from anyone impacted.
According to Forbes, Amazon customers who live near a Whole Foods, Amazon Fresh, or Kohl's location will be charged $1 now if they return items via a UPS store. And that move could have ripple effects.
I'm hearing that some retailers are starting to charge for returns, and that includes DSW, Zara, H&M, and my expectation is that this is going to grow.
Brands like Gap and Banana Republic have shortened their return windows. Anthropologie and REI are now charging a fee for mailed returns. The reason? Returns are costly.
Well, if you have an X account, formerly known as Twitter, listen up. The social media platform intends to start charging users. Elon Musk says X needs to have a monthly subscription to combat the amount of bots on the platform. He made the comments yesterday during a live streamed conversation. Musk did not say how soon it would start, nor did he say how much it would cost. Wheel of Fortune fans, you may be losing Pat Sajak next fall, but the good news is Vanna White is back for at least 2 more years. It will take the show to its 50th anniversary in 2025. Vanna has been a co-host with Sajak since 1982. Next year, she will be joined by new co-host Ryan Seacrest. And that does it for this edition of the National Desk. We invite you to join us again this evening for more coverage of America's top stories. Just check our local listings. I'm Amira David. Thank you so much for watching.